Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, a very good morning to you and welcome to this virtual conference of the Small Island Developing States Leaders Group. I'm Juliet Foster and I'll be guiding you through 90 minutes of what I'm sure will be informed, lively and thought-provoking discussion on small island state policy development taking place against the background of a damaging pandemic. Now, as we all know, COVID-19 is dominating the global conversation, with infection and mortality rates still ominous as the emphasis shifts to the equitable distribution of vaccines. What hasn't changed is the ongoing speculation about what the future will look like in a post-pandemic world, or indeed how it will affect small island developing states. Well, this is one of the reasons why we're here, because the virus has presented us with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to draw a roadmap where everyone has a viable stake. This is especially true of small islands, better known under the acronym SID. Just to put this in context, these are a small, distinct group of 38 UN member states and 20 non-UN members or associate members that face unique social, economic, and indeed environmental vulnerabilities. Now, COVID may have exposed human frailties, but it's also given over 63 million people in small island developing states a chance to have their voices heard and assert a role that goes beyond that of marginal contributors in any reconstruction. Now, the arrival of the revised Cotonou Agreement between the European Union and the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States is therefore very timely when we view it in that context. The deal itself amplifies those voices because remember, 48% of the ACP members and 71% of Commonwealth members are small island developing states and represent 20% of the UN membership. So the big question, why should highly developed countries listen to 63 million voices? Quite simply because the issues that affect them impact all of us. In other words, their problems are our problems too. Continuing restrictions on access to financial resources directed at SIDS countries limits their ability to implement trade and environmental agreements. Likewise, climate change has impacted them in sustaining their indigenous and vulnerable economies. So how much of a game changer is the revised Cotonou Agreement? And does it give genuine political and economic clout to its SIDS OACPS signatories? Well, these are amongst the issues to be explored by our distinguished panel of experts. What's going to happen is that some of them will have 5 minutes to outline their views, after which there will be a discussion. Some of our panelists will be speaking for a little bit longer, 10 or 12 minutes. But because we only have 90 minutes, I will personally alert the panel with a time interjection when there are 2 minutes remaining on their speeches. So please do stick to your allocated time slots. Okay, that's the housekeeping. I'd now like to hand the floor for some words of welcome to His Excellency David Doyle, who's the Ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis to UNESCO and also one of the instigators of this global SIDS Leaders Group. So Ambassador Doyle, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Juliet. Good morning and greetings to the distinguished panel of speakers and of course to you, the audience. Welcome to this, the first event of the Global SIDS Leaders Initiative, dedicated to the implications of the Cotonou Agreement on SIDS, this multitude of small island developing states across the globe. Over the coming months, this group will be exploring a range of topics associated with small island developing states, from covering the adverse impact of climate change to access vis-a-vis concessionary and innovating finance, from challenges of integrating ITC across all sectors, education, industry and healthcare, to strengthening food and agricultural security, to mention but a few of the topics. Now, the genesis of this this particular group and the debates indeed is driven by the need to raise the profile and, more importantly, the voice of small islands on the international agenda. The objective is to secure a better understanding of small islands' specific challenges, build mutual support, a key international transnational and regional negotiations and ensure ultimately that small island states are an integral part to the solutions of the big issues that we are facing today, whether it be climate change or combating COVID-19. You know, one of the key characteristics of these islands is that they transcend 4 regions across the globe, from the Pacific to the Indian Ocean, from the Atlantic to the Caribbean, collectively representing 1/5 of all UN membership. Yet, the remoteness, the size, limited institutional capacity on the ground, sometimes and frequently results in these islands facing particular challenges in getting their collective voice heard at bilateral and international level discussions. Ultimately, the purpose of this global SIDS leadership initiative is to seek to inscribe SIDS concerns, risks, opportunities, and strengths on the global agenda. Thank you for listening and enjoy today's debate. Back to you, Juliet. Thank you.
Ambassador, many thanks for that. I would now like to hand the floor to His Excellency Jean-Paul Cateron, who is the Ambassador of the Solomon Islands to UNESCO and the FAO. He also co-chairs the GSL group. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliette. A few words in French for French-speaking attendees. Je voudrais vous souhaiter à tous la bienvenue. Les SIDS sont des petits pays et ce sont des petits pays qui ont des gros problèmes. Et à la suite de multiples années de globalisation abusive dans certains domaines et maintenant de pandémie, les pays sont encore plus petits et les problèmes sont encore plus gros. Nous avons la nécessité de revisiter notre multilatéralisme et je vous donne rapidement un exemple. On parle à la FAO d'alimentation, d'agriculture et de sécurité alimentaire. On parle à l'Organisation mondiale de la santé, on parle de santé publique. Dans les îles du Pacifique, la santé publique dépend essentiellement de l'alimentation et de l'agriculture. Les maladies qui dévastent nos îles dans le Pacifique sont essentiellement des maladies non transmissibles, c'est-à-dire le diabète et l'obésité. Donc, il y a un problème et il y a un lien direct entre le développement de l'agriculture et la santé de la population. Pourquoi y a-t-il ce lien? Parce qu'il n'y a pas d'éducation à l'alimentation. C'est-à-dire qu'on parle d'éducation à l'UNESCO, mais on ne parle pas de la nécessité de former et d'éduquer au respect de soi-même et au bien-être de soi-même sur le plan de la santé. Et puis, si l'on veut reprendre tout cela et fixer une gouvernance qui soit efficace et dynamique, il faut un capacity building programme qui soit à même de former les gouvernements et les hauts responsables à l'approche de ce genre de problème. C'est-à-dire qu'on ne peut plus parler d'agriculture à la FAO, on ne peut plus parler de santé à l'OMS, d'éducation à l'UNESCO, de capacity building à l'UNIDO sans fédérer tout cela et agir d'une manière conjointe et véritablement constructive. Voilà pourquoi nous avons pris cette initiative d'aborder les problématiques des SIDS de manière transversale. On ne peut plus maintenant parler et travailler entre soi. Et il y a en plus, je voudrais le souligner, à cause d'un défaut de ressources humaines et d'un défaut de ressources financières, une quasi-impossibilité pour ces pays d'être représentés dans les organisations internationales. Et ça, c'est un énorme problème auquel nous faisons face tous les jours. Où sont les SIDS? Comment peut-on aider les SIDS? Comment peut-on véritablement favoriser leur évolution et leur développement? C'est pour ça que l'accord de Cotonou est important. C'est pour ça que le soutien de l'Union européenne dans tous les domaines de la vie sociétale est quelque chose d'essentiel. C'est en fait l'introduction à la série de vidéoconférences que nous allons faire. Alors, je voudrais vous remercier tous d'avoir accepté de participer à cette rencontre et puis remercier particulièrement M. Reinders. Je connais M. Reinders depuis très longtemps et c'est un homme d'État. Il a l'expérience de la gouvernance au niveau national. Il a une expérience très longue des affaires européennes et je pense que pour nous, qui représentons des pays en difficulté, il est l'interlocuteur et surtout il représente la dimension humaine nécessaire à l'approche et au traitement de nos problèmes. Merci beaucoup. Je donne donc, d'après le scénario, la parole à M. Reinders, commissaire européen à la justice.
Merci beaucoup, M. Garteron. Et je voudrais vous dire que je suis très heureux de retrouver un certain nombre de représentants des sites aujourd'hui. J'ai eu l'occasion d'avoir des contacts dans d'autres fonctions au préalable. Et je voudrais vous dire quelques mots sur le multilatéralisme, évidemment, auquel nous sommes tellement attachés, et quelques mots de deux éléments majeurs que nous mettons en avant dans ce multilatéralisme, parce que ça fait une partie intégrante de l'ADN de l'Union européenne, la solidarité et l'état de droit. But I will switch maybe to English to explain that we are committed to multilateralism. And first of all, to say that solidarity is part of who we are as Europeans and between one another. It is therefore part of who we are beyond our borders. And for example, because we are in a pandemic for the moment, as we work to procure vaccinations for Europeans, we made a commitment to ensuring universal access to vaccines everywhere on Earth, including the Solomon Islands, which last month became the second country in the Pacific Islands to receive doses via the COVAX facility. And you know that the European Union is the first donator for COVAX in this process. As an international institution ourselves, we have always and will always believe in multilateralism where every voice counts. For example, it is well known that without small island states working together with the European Union, days before the deadline in Paris, the historic climate agreement, the Paris Agreement, should never have been achieved. So it's very important to continue to work very close together. And I would say that we try so to do the same when we discuss about the rule of law. We try to have the same external policy than the internal policy. I don't want to enter into details, but the integrity of the building of the rule of law in the EU is an important part, of course, of our action. It still has, like any UNESCO World Heritage Site, a universal value to humanity. But as for any landmark of such value, it requires constant care, reparation, and sometimes modernization. I want just to say that we are working on the rule of law at home in the European Union to be able to discuss on the rule of law with some partners. And I want to describe all the details, but we have the capacity in the European Union now to provide every year a report on the rule of law. It's a preventive tool to describe the situation in all the 27 member states. I've started last year with the presentation in September of the first rule of law report, and I will go to the second edition in July about independence of the justice system, fight against corruption, media pluralism, and all the checks and balances in the institutional order. We have that to prevent different kind of negative evolutions about the rule of law, but also to exchange best practices. Of course, if it's not enough, we have the capacity to go to the Court of Justice at the EU level for infringements. It's also possible to use a very big tool, the Article 7 of our treaty, to suspend the voting rights of the member states if there are real breaches to the rule of law. And now we'll have also the possibility to make a link between the funding of different policies and the rule of law. And that's an important part because we'll discuss the same with the partners. And for the moment, we have the same discussions with the candidate countries in the Balkans, to give an example, the Western Balkans, but we have also the same discussions with our partner in Africa, in the Pacific Islands, and in the Caribbean. And it's very important to us to work on this. And I believe that it's important to have such a conversation with you today because the EU is firmly committed to supporting others' nurture to rule of law in any way we can. And as I said before, it is important to us at home, therefore, it is reflected in all external relations, including with many of you across all areas of the rule of law. Across the Pacific and the Caribbean, the EU is supporting the protection of fundamental rights. This is something we have a lot of experience at home, notably for women, children, and LGBTIQ people, to improve the transparency of public finance management we are also providing technical assistance to the Office of the Auditor General in the Solomon Islands. We are providing support and technical assistance to our partners in the Caribbean through bilateral and regional interventions, including dedicated budget support programs. To improve access to justice in Fiji, the European Union is supporting justice sector reform to improve the delivery and accessibility of justice services for children and vulnerable people. And through our budget support, we have accompanied Jamaica's efforts in modernizing its justice system and strengthening the institutional and administrative capacity of justice institutions as part of structural reforms. This is also the type of support the European Union is providing to its own member states, because we want to develop such a kind of capacity at home, like I said, but we want also to support such a kind of development with our partners. For example, we are in the process of setting up in the European Union a European Public Prosecutor Office to investigate crimes against the budget in the EU. And of course, we are very open to share our experience in such a way with the different partners. And we discussed that to exchange best practices among member states. Last month, we have had again at the EU level a discussion about the rule of law in countries like Germany, France, Ireland, Greece, and Spain together to exchange the best practice and to see what are the possible developments. Of course, the media, it's an important part of the rule of law discussion. The nation of journalist Georgios Karevas in Greece outside his home last month was again underlined the EU's need to step up its work to protect journalists. Last year, we provided over 4 million euros to do this in the EU, and we want to work with our partners to be sure that it's possible to protect journalists also when they are investigating in different kind of issues and sometimes very sensitive issues. For example, the selling of nationalities to the super rich, the so-called golden passport, raise all kinds of security challenges, as the OECD has underlined. But there's also raised challenges to the rule of law, issues around money laundering, tax evasion, and corruption. Yes, there are EU member states who are also doing it. In practice, with enough money, you can simply buy EU nationality and even vote in elections. The European Commission considers this as a violation of EU law, and the President Ursula von der Leyen and myself have been explicit here. European values are not for sale. If a country enjoys visa-free access to the EU, any applicant of a citizenship scheme must undergo security and background checks to the highest possible standard. At the same time, for a country that enjoys visa-free access to the EU, this should not be used as a marketing tool to attract money in exchange for citizenship, because the European Union, again, is not for sale. And the citizenship of the European Union is not for sale, like we have said to some member states inside the EU. And we are, as you know very well, at the beginning of a new era in the EU's relation with the Pacific and Caribbean regions. Only a few weeks ago, my colleague, Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen,
2 minutes, Monsieur, 2 minutes.
Yes, took part, I will conclude, in the initialing with Togolese Minister of Foreign Affairs, Professor Robert Dussey, of the new partnership agreement between the European Union and members of the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. This was a major political achievement, and the negotiated agreement between the EU and our largest group of partner countries is entirely in tune with the international challenges and realities of today. And it will set up together as an international force to be reckoned with. We know, all of us in this partnership, that when we combine forces, as we did, I said, in Paris for the Paris Agreement, great things can be achieved. And so we will promote solidarity, rule of law, and all the values that we have in common. And we want to see that with all Pacific partners, for example, the focus is on building democracy, and to build also peaceful and wide-based societies anchored by rule of law again and good governance. With our Caribbean partners, there is a focus on inclusivity and security in society, along with other priorities such as promoting, again, the rule of law, gender equality, and human rights. The smooth negotiations on the rule of law in both cases underline our shared values and vision on access to justice and consolidating the rule of law. And we will continue to work like this. As many Europeans did, so too did many Icelanders risk their lives for a world free from tyranny. Because you know that if we are speaking so much about the rule of law in the EU, it's because we have started the construction of our union after the Second World War. And as US Admiral William Halsey famously said, Guadalcanal saved the Pacific. In the 78 years since the decisive victory against totalitarianism, we have been on the same page. I said a moment ago that the new partnership agreements are also entirely in tune with the realities and international challenge of today. And I want to conclude to say that it will be important to us to continue to share the same values, to try to help not only member states in the EU, but also many countries in our partnership with Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific Islands to develop their economic and social capacity in a good way, with an open society. And again, I will be very pleased to listen to the comments today in such a way, because it's not just an economic partnership. I want to insist on this. It's a partnership based on values, and we need to continue to promote those values in a multilateral development, because you know that in the last years it was very difficult to take part in multilateral discussions due to a specific approach in the US. But now, maybe with the new US administration, with an agreement like the Cotonou agreement, it will be possible to go back to more and more multilateral discussions. So thanks for such an opportunity to say some words to you about our vision on the multilateralism in relation with solidarity, with human rights, and with the rule of law. But again, I will be very pleased to listen to your comments.
Thank you so much for that, Commissioner. Please stay with me, because there is a question that I'd like to put to you, because we know that so many things are happening. There are multiple other trade agreements between larger regional powers, intense deliberations happening on climate change between the likes of the European Union, China, and the United States. And I want you to put something in context. You referenced it, in fact, in that speech. How important is the Cotonou Agreement for SIDS when we view it in the wider multilateral context?
I said that before about the Paris Agreement. We have seen that when we have had to discuss about climate change, it was very useful to be on the same line with so many different partners. And with the Cotonou Agreement, we are working with many partners, not only in the region of the Caribbean and in the Pacific Islands, but also in Africa. And of course, I'm very pleased to say that when we are discussing on different kind of issues, it's very important to show that we are not alone. We try to do the same, to be very concrete, with the new partnership between the European Union and the US. We have put on the table a new agenda, not only to try to see if it's possible to reach some agreement between us, but also to take part together in international discussions. And the new structure of the agreement maintains the overall framework for cooperation with the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific group of states, while deepening the partnership with each region, taking into account the regional specificities, challenges, and vision. But in such an agreement, that will give us also the possibility not only to take into account the specificities of the different partners, but to try to have an influence together at the worldwide level. And again, not only in discussions for new agreements like the Paris Agreement, but maybe also in different international organizations, like in the UN. Of course, I have had many opportunities to discuss with members of the SIDS in the UN, but I'm thinking also about the WHO when we are discussing about the pandemic. So with such an agreement now, we are reinforcing our capacity to be aligned and to work together in multilateral discussions.
Okay, so a wonderful note on which to end that question, but thank you so much for that, Commissioner Reinders. Let's begin with the first of our panelist presentations. Now, this comes to us from the Honourable Timothy Sylvester Harris. He is the Prime Minister of St Kitts and Nevis. This is a position that he's held since 2015. Just to give you a little bit more about him, previously he served as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Finance, and as Senior Minister and Minister for Agriculture. So a very extensive career. Now, sadly, he is unable to join us, but he very kindly sent this pre-recorded message. So sit back and listen to the Honourable Timothy Sylvester Harris.
Excellencies, ministers, and senior policy makers from the multilateral agencies, I bring you greetings from the government and people of St. Kitts and Nevis. I am delighted to address you at this, the first dedicated session of the Global SIDS Leadership Initiative on the topic of the Cotonou Agreement, alongside a distinguished panel of leading personalities from the European Commission, the Commonwealth Secretariat, the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, Seychelles, and the Kingdom of Morocco. Allow me to commend this Global SID Leaders Initiative and to thank His Excellency Jean-Paul Catteron, Ambassador of the Solomon Islands to UNESCO and FAO, and the St. Kitts and Nevis's own Ambassador to UNESCO, Dr. David Doyle, for their constructive work leading to the realization of the GSL initiative. This initiative has the full support of my government as a mechanism to raise the SIDS policy issues to global importance. Over the past year, we have indeed been sharply reminded of the vulnerability of small islands as we struggle to deal with the economic, social, and sanitary fallout of COVID-19. The pandemic has raised the level of urgency for a more focused and targeted level of economic and technical assistance associated with multilateral cooperation agreements, notably within the Cotonou framework. It calls for a different relationship with important regional partners like the European Union, one that recognizes the particularities and unique challenges that SIDS face. Most small island developing states like St. Kitts and Nevis are middle to high income countries, but with economies that remain small and gross national income that varies widely. Added to this phenomenon are the challenges of size and other factors such as high import sensitivities, remoteness, limited capacity to raise domestic resources, indebtedness, high energy, and transportation costs. These are all key inhibiting factors for SIDS in generating scale and resources to achieve sustainable development. The added vulnerability to natural disasters and climate change, impacting notably freshwater resources, even in stable conditions, accentuate these challenges. Thus, we welcome the Cotonou text recognition of some of these challenges, especially the new 3+1 structure, with priorities tailored to each region's needs and dynamics. There is also a sense that SIDS are, at last, being given heightened priority. Priority to deal with outstanding differences over key issues like trade, migration, and labor mobility. We also applaud the renewed focus on climate change and environmental sustainability and special attention to sustainable, inclusive growth and job creation, in particular investment and private sector development. However, for the Cotonou arrangements to be optimal for ACP island states, allow me to offer some further thoughts. A more distinctly small islands regional approach must be implemented to address continuing barriers to trade, including non-tariff measures. A framework to enable SIDS to adapt to growing and administratively burdensome EU standards in areas like integrating ESG into corporation activities would be a good starting point. We urge that the EU would reinforce the European Development Fund, probably one of the most crucial mechanisms for both regional and national level funding in the Caribbean and Pacific. Given that the most pivotal issue on the global health and economic agenda at present is COVID-19, we should not miss the opportunity of this crisis to link trade rules to respond to COVID-19. As the only proven solution to this disease, access at a reasonable cost to vaccines is of course a priority for all small island developing states. The vulnerability of food and medicines, supply chains for SIDS need to be urgently reviewed. Linking the Cotonou framework to the Sustainable Development Goal is of course welcoming news for SIDS, but priorities have to be set that are vigorously focused and relevant to SIDS needs, be they climate action, quality education, water security. Each of the SIDS region should be in a position to obtain a tangible project with the EU, similar to the much lauded comprehensive strategy with Africa, governing green transition, digital transformation, sustainable growth, and jobs, etc. Most small islands across the Caribbean, the Pacific, and Indian Ocean, even middle-income states, share a number of key challenges in financing their development strategies. High levels of public debt, especially in the Caribbean, adds to this phenomenon. We would want to see a reversal of SIDS being poorly funded, with current levels of approved finance fulfilling only a small part of their actual needs. The Cotonou arrangement should focus, in our view, on strengthening development aid and concomitant financing. Data show that SIDS receives very little official development assistance as a share of the total official development assistance at just about 5.7%. In our view, the use of GDP per capita criterion makes SIDS ineligible for ODA funding and a low priority for bilateral donors. This criterion disguises deep factors of vulnerability that do not capture an island's level of development and remains, in our view, an inadequate measure of this development for SIDS, which are disproportionately vulnerable to shocks such as the pandemic. I want to say thank you to all for participating in this particular forum, and thank you for giving consideration to the views I have expressed in the foregoing statement.
Many thanks there to Prime Minister Timothy Sylvester Harris, the Prime Minister, of course, of St. Kitts and Nevis. I'd now like to hand the floor to His Excellency Jorge Bello Pinto Chicote. Now, he is the Secretary General of the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, and also a former Angolan minister. He will be giving a presentation. Excellency, the floor is yours. You have 12 minutes. 12 minutes.
Thank you very much. Let me on the outset thank the statement of the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, and as well the statements made earlier by the Commissioner Renders, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Belgium. Your Excellencies and dear colleagues, it is indeed an honor to have been invited to participate in this event today, which is at a unique time in the history of the OACPS. States, the 79-member members strong OACPS represents a population of about 1.1 billion peoples scattered across the blue planet. We have just a few short weeks ago initialed the new OACPS EU Partnership Agreement, comprising a foundation agreement and 3 regional protocols, one of each for Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific. The negotiations, which lasted 2.5 years, were at times intense, but we are very happy the agreement addresses OACPS challenges, issues, and opportunities, and importantly, the unique challenges and concomitant vulnerabilities of the 38 small island developing states of the OACPS, situated in the 4 of the 6 OACPS regions. Excellencies, I can attest that throughout the course of the negotiations, our OACPS political hierarchy remained engaged and were very vocal about the responsibility of all parties to acknowledge the unique characteristics and issues of OACPS small island developing states. This message has permeated SEED's issues throughout the final negotiated OACPS EU Foundation Agreement text and in the 3 regional protocols. It is self-evident in the articles throughout the entire agreement, which in number 1 supports the principles of multilateral engagement with our international partners, and number 2 acknowledges the challenges and vulnerability of small island developing states, as well as the environment and climate change. Number 3, it calls for global health security and governance, particularly relevant in today's ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Number 4, it supports inclusive economic growth and development and upholds the right to secure livelihoods, the right to democracy and human rights. It defends the rights to protect the most vulnerable echelons of our societies, including women and youth. At the level of the OACPS, we pursue the SEEDS agenda through the OACPS SEEDS Forum, which is an established subsidiary and consultative organ under our revised constitution, the revised Georgetown Agreement. The OACPS SEEDS Forum brings together the 38 OACPS SEEDS members who have much in common, including inter alia, their small size, narrow resource base, multiple forms of poverty, and some debt distress from impacts of the climate crisis, disaster risks from natural hazards, and more recently, impacts of other exogenous shocks such as the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of the OACPS SEEDS Forum, our Brussels-based ambassadors, under the leadership of its incumbent coordinator, Ambassador Joy Ann Skinner of Barbados, have identified the following as priorities for OACPS SEEDS in 2021. 1, access to finance. 2, addressing debt and debt sustainability. 3, climate action. 4, ocean governance and blue economy. 5, developing and multidimensional vulnerability index. 6, health COVID-19 action plan. We are conscious that we need to actively monitor SEED's interests within the context of other key multilateral instruments, such as the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, the Samoa Pathway, and our own Georgetown revised agreement adopted in 2019. The recently concluded OACPS EU Foundation Agreement of our new partnership with the European Union for the next 20 years is also no exception. Under the new OACPS EU Partnership Agreement, concrete action in support of SEEDs will require coordination, joint advocacy, and enhanced policy dialogue if we are to effectively address SEED's vulnerabilities in the trade services, tourism, agriculture, and financial sectors. Of paramount importance will be our joint efforts to develop a composite, multidimensional vulnerability index and ensure regular, open, and inclusive engagement between all EU and OACPS SEEDS stakeholders. The challenge for OACPS SEEDS is to focus on building resilience. We have taken careful note of recent public statements of commitments and offers of assistance to vulnerable developing states to transition to low carbon pathways made by developed countries' leaders in last month's Global Climate Summit. As we prepare for COP26, it is crucial that we join forces and apply OACPS climate diplomacy and advocacy action on SEED's priority issues as we reiterate and reinforce the common but differentiated responsibilities of the EU and all our global partners. The OACPS stands ready to facilitate this process. As I come to the end of my statement, Your Excellencies, I'm being called to another meeting, but my ASG for Environment and Climate Action will continue to be present with you in this meeting. And I thank you very much for having invited us today to be with you and to say we are committed to the issues and challenges related to the SEEDs, small and developing countries. I thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. As he said, he has to leave us, but do not fear, because the Assistant Secretary General, Christelle Pratt, she will be joining us and also answering questions in the discussion which follows later. Now, I would like to welcome to the stage His Excellency Louis Radegond, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Tourism of the Seychelles. Just to give you a little bit of background to him, prior to his current appointment, he served as the High Commissioner to the UK, Ambassador to Belgium and to UNESCO. Now, sadly, he cannot stay for the entirety of the session, but for now, Minister, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam. Madam Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Mr. Secretary General of the OACPS, Commissioner Reinders, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Reinders, I thank you very much for the comments. We know your commitment to SEEDS. We know your commitment to the member states of the OACPS. Seychelles is honored to be a participant in today's event, which is also the maiden activity of the group of SEEDS leaders. I commend my former colleagues at UNESCO, Ambassadors Carteron and Doyle, for this great initiative. Excellencies, as an African SEEDS, Seychelles straddles the two constituencies within OACPS, namely Africa and SEEDS. This dual status offers us a vantage point from which to reflect on and address issues affecting OACPS, as our experience is common to both constituencies. The theme of today's event illustrates the critical importance of EU-OACPS collaboration in the emergence of a new world order, one that is inclusive, equitable, and rules-based. Such a world order can only be sustainable if anchored in societies built on solid contracts that are rights-based and rest on the rule of law. A just globalization is one that is rules-based and anchored in rights and I would like here to thank EU and OACPS for having decided to scale up their cooperation, committed themselves to a fruitful negotiation process, and coming up with an innovative modular negotiation outcome in the form of a new partnership agreement. This new cooperation framework caters for the needs of the whole constellation of OACPS, while at the same time tailored to the specificities of the three distinct regions, the Economic Partnership Agreement groups and individual countries, and affording special attention to countries most in need and funneling resources where aid money can be most impactful. Congratulations to the negotiation teams led by Professor Robert Dursey and Commissioners Neven Mimeka and Jutta Orbi-Pelenen for conducting the negotiation process in a timely manner and ensuring an outcome that will make the new partnership agreement an example of win-win North-South cooperation. Human rights, rule of law, and good governance, one of the pillars of this new partnership agreement, are central to sustainable development. There is no such thing as a hierarchy of rights, nor a dichotomy between development and democracy, and neither is it true that good governance is a luxury for developed countries. Human rights being universal, inalienable, indivisible, and interdependent, their protection and promotion are essential in ensuring good governance, democracy, and development. Sustainable development can only be democratic and rights-based. Good governance dents into inequalities and reverse damages to the environment, as oftentimes the latter two exist where corruption is rampant. Sustainable development is a deliverable of rule of law, as through protection of the rights of consumers, workers, and citizens, as well as properties, it fosters a model of economic growth that is respectful of environmental limits and human dignity. A democratic setup that respects human rights is most likely to be one in which there is less environmental degradation and sustainable economic growth. As the instrument of a comprehensive cooperation between EU and the OACPS, the new partnership agreement will be catalytical in promoting a more balanced and just globalization, as it will impact on such areas as international trade, climate change, peace and security, migration, and mobility. The government I have the honor of being part of has sterling democratic credentials. The president was elected last year in a free and fair election. When he was still in the opposition, his struggle for transitional justice led to the creation of the Truth, Reconciliation and National Unity Commission, which shed light on human rights abuses of the former regime. His struggle for good governance led to the setting up of the first anti-corruption body in the country. Rule of law is a strategic thrust of the program of the new governments since the fight against drug abuse and trafficking and against organized crime and the promotion of maritime security are among its priorities. Human development is the centerpiece of its strategy, as efficiency gains in targeting assistance to those in need are the focus of rights-based reforms in public health, education, social housing, and social assistance. I thank you very much, and my apologies for having to rush out to another engagement. I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to participate in this forum today. Thank you.
Minister, thank you so much for that. It's a pity you have to rush off because I know that there were a couple of questions that I wanted to put to you, but clearly you do not have the time. But we thank you so much for your attendance and for your excellent words, which I'm sure will be fed into the wider discussion that will follow. So please, thank you and do stay safe. Now, let's move on because I would like to welcome Baroness Patricia Scotland. She's the Secretary General of the Commonwealth of Nations. She is the 6th Secretary General and the first woman in the organisation's history to hold the post. And she herself hails from a Caribbean small island state. Baroness Scotland, it's good to see you. The floor is now yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and greetings everyone. It's wonderful to be connected, and I greatly appreciate this valuable opportunity to share with you our Commonwealth perspective to address the impact of climate change on women and girls in our small island developing states. As you know, climate change is now a global crisis affecting our world at rural, urban and cosmopolitan settings. Greenhouse gas emissions are more than 50% higher than in 1990, and climate-related disasters have exacerbated gender inequalities, especially amongst women who are in the forefront of the informal economy and small, medium enterprises. Statistics published by the United Nations show that women are more disproportionately impacted by climate change than men. The data can be relatively explained by several factors which are social, economic, and cultural. Firstly, women are primary caregivers and providers of food and fuel, hence making them vulnerable when flood and drought occur, and this directly results and increases women and girl-headed households. Secondly, drought and degradation of land for farming and agricultural produce have affected women dominantly employed within the sector, and women will be likely experience poverty, insecurity, loss of livelihoods, and sexual violence in the wake of disasters, as recorded in most of our member states. In some of our states, we have seen a 300% rise in domestic violence just through this pandemic alone. So despite their vulnerability, women should not only be seen as victims of climate change, but as active agents and champions of adaptation and climate change mitigation. The Cotonou Agreement, now more than ever, is one of the tools to deliver the UN Sustainable Development Goal 13 to combat climate change and increase resilience, which is inclusive of women and other vulnerable groups. One of the key objectives of the Cotonou Agreement is, of course, the reduction of poverty and establishing a new, fairer and more equitable world order, especially in trade agreements. And this is a true testament that our member states need to pull resources and skills to achieve their national development goals. So clear vision, dedication, and collective commitment are essential in order to facilitate new solutions for our member countries in combating climate change and attaining that new zero commitments. Now, as the Commonwealth, we have been available to all our partners with our toolkits, including the Connectivity Agenda for Trade and Investment, the Commonwealth Blue Charter, which aims to save our oceans and marine life, the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, which currently operates through its 12 advisors in our small Commonwealth countries to unlock green recovery and increase investment in climate resilient structures. But we've got the Common Sensing Project, which is supporting Fiji, Solomon Islands and Vanuatu to leverage Earth observation data around disaster and climate risk, which will be used for everyone. But in addition, we are developing the Universal Vulnerability Index, which is a multi-dimensional, inclusive index, which seeks to take into account the structural, and non-structural aspects of vulnerability and resilience, responding to the needs of SIDS, which have been identified so well by the Honourable Prime Minister Harris and the OACPS Secretary General today, which we hope will secure the trenchant support of everyone at this meeting. But we also have our call for living lands and a living lands charter. Now we have, all of us, working together, the necessary experts on climate change to advise our member states on the ramifications of our trade deals on the ozone layer, our oceans and our land. And we also have the data on the pollutants and the mitigation strategies that we need to forestall any incoming pandemic or catastrophe. The missing ingredient is that we now need to start working together to craft a more inclusive strategy for all our member states to fight climate change. The Commonwealth represents 54 countries, 1/3 of the world's population, but 40 of our members are members of this group. And I call upon all our friends and partners to support the Commonwealth Sustainable Energy Transition Agenda, as most women continue to use biomass as a source of fuel. And this can change through adoption of a greener and climate-friendly technology. It's concerning that we are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it. What we have achieved in the last 20 years of the Cotonou Agreement reflects the next 20 years, especially if climate change, mitigation and adaptation remains a top agenda in all our trade agreements. So I believe we can do this. We must do this. The time is now, and it's down to us. And I thank everyone on this call for the trenchant support, not only in coming to the Cotonou Agreement, but also working together to make sure we deliver for the people that we love. So thank you.
Thank you, Baroness Scotland. That was a really impassioned speech there. And what I wanted to ask you was about your optimism, because you brilliantly outlined the case there about the connection between female vulnerability and climate change. This conversation now is happening against the backdrop of COVID-19. Again, that has exposed those frailties. Are there now better grounds, stronger grounds to be optimistic about breaking that dynamic, that if you are a woman in some of these countries, climate change perhaps makes you even more vulnerable than some of the cultural factors that may impose on you?
Well, I think it is, because you know what COVID has done? It's said none of us have anywhere to hide. This is impacting all of us, and it's bringing out all that ugly underbelly, and it's forcing us to look multilaterally. If there was a time when we thought narrow-based national interest was going to fix this, COVID told us that's not going to happen. And if you look at what we're doing, we've launched a Commonwealth Says No More campaign in relation to domestic violence, because the domestic violence has really gone up. It's affecting 1 in 3 women. It has a terrible impact on our economy. And those who are in climate vulnerable circumstances are even worse. So the fact that we've been able to highlight this and that we're working together, we're pooling the data. If you go onto our innovation hub, all the multilateral agencies are working together. I'm signed agreements with all our multilateral partners. It's down to us. You know, people have been looking to say someone else has to do it. There's nobody else. If not us, who? And if not now, when? So I think the time is now, and we have a choice. And everyone on this call is making it clear that we are choosing to work together. We are choosing to make the difference. And unless we make that choice, then the future for us is terrible. And I'm so proud of what we've done through Cotonou and the fact that everyone has been able to put their shoulder to the wheel. And I'm making total commitment from the point of view of the Commonwealth that we are in this for the long haul. And I'm really hoping that absolutely everyone comes on board with our Universal Vulnerability Index, which is, I believe, the most comprehensive, multi-dimensional index. I think, as Prime Minister Harris and my dear brother, the Secretary General, has said, this new change has to happen. We need a new infrastructure. We can't just have GDP being the only criterion by which it's judged, because it's not working. And so we have to start again. And I'm hoping everyone will get on board with our multidimensional index so that we will be able to deliver what we must deliver if we have to have a real future for our children.
Baroness Scotland, thank you so much for that. I'd now like to welcome our final panelist, His Excellency Mohamed Ouadja, who is a former Minister of Justice of Morocco. He's also served as Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Morocco to the United Nations in Geneva and is currently Chair of the UN Investigation Commission on Human Rights Abuses in Libya. Now, His Excellency will be speaking in French. Monsieur, vous avez 5 minutes. Merci.
Thank you very much, Juliette. Tout d'abord, permettez-moi de remercier les organisateurs et les sponsors de cette conférence très importante, surtout en ces temps de pandémie qui exposent la fragilité du système international et ses vulnérabilités. Le Maroc appelle à un multilatéralisme de responsabilité. La communauté internationale doit faire preuve de solidarité et d'ambition. Bien que nous sommes encore dans l'œil du cyclone, les efforts nationaux du Maroc contre la lutte contre la pandémie de Covid-19 ne l'ont pas empêché d'être et de rester solidaire avec ses pays frères et pays amis. Au plus fort de la pandémie, le Maroc a tenu à envoyer une aide médicale importante à 25 pays africains frères en soutien à leurs efforts nationaux contre le Covid. Et bien sûr, dans ces 25, il y a des pays du SIDS. Le Maroc estime que les PMA et les SIDS devraient être davantage impliqués dans les programmes de la coopération régionale, notamment dans l'utilisation des énergies renouvelables. Le Maroc a annulé l'ensemble de la dette des PMA africains. Il donne aux produits de PMA et des pays insulaires un accès sans quota et une franchise des droits de douane à son marché, tout en examinant en fonction de la situation de chaque pays les aides au commerce. Le principal instrument développé par le Maroc dans ses rapports avec les PMA et les PIED est la coopération sud-sud. Le Maroc a su se positionner comme un pays leader dans la coopération sud-sud. Il a pu, au fil des années, développer un réseau des accords de coopération parmi les plus denses dans le monde et qui touche un ensemble de 160 pays sur les 5 continents. Conscient de l'importance de la coopération avec les SIDS, est conscient qu'étant parmi les pays les plus impactés par les changements climatiques, le Maroc estime qu'il faut concentrer les efforts internationaux en faveur des PMA et en faveur des SIDS. Le Royaume plaide pour un nouvel objectif de financement collectif post-2025 en vue de soutenir les efforts communs en matière d'action climatique. Prévoir un nouvel objectif de financement pour l'après-2025 serait un signal fort et concret pour soutenir les efforts internationaux en vue de préserver la crédibilité et la durabilité de l'action climatique. Lors de la COP22, tenue à Marrakech en 2016, le Maroc n'a ménagé aucun effort pour faire entendre les voix des pays les plus vulnérables au changement climatique, au premier rang desquels se trouvent les pays du continent africain et des États insulaires du Pacifique. Le premier sommet de l'action africaine organisé par le Maroc, organisé pendant la présidence marocaine de la COP22 à l'initiative de Sa Majesté le roi Mohamed VI, a marqué une nouvelle ère de l'action climatique africaine pour apporter des réponses concrètes aux impacts alarmants des changements climatiques dans notre région. Le Maroc a contribué à la mise en place et à l'opérationnalisation des 3 commissions africaines de climat dédiées pour le bassin de Congo, la région du Sahel et bien sûr pour les États insulaires. Le Royaume a également lancé les initiatives 100% africaines dont l'initiative qui s'appelle Durabilité, Stabilité et Sécurité et les initiatives pour l'adaptation de l'agriculture africaine, qui sont des exemples éminents et promoteurs de ce travail continental. Outre sa coopération renforcée avec les pays de son continent d'appartenance, l'Afrique, le Maroc a développé des cadres de coopération régionaux spécifiques avec les pays du Caraïbes. Le Forum des îles du Pacifique prenant en compte leurs spécificités chaque année. C'est ainsi que je signale les travaux du 3e Forum Maroc, État insulaire du Pacifique, qui s'est tenu à Laayoune le 27 février 2020, ont été sanctionnés par des feuilles de route pluriannuelles de coopération entre le Maroc et les États insulaires du Pacifique selon les priorités nationales des États du Pacifique et le potentiel de coopération qu'offre le Maroc dans le cadre des partenariats de coopération et économique et commercial gagnant. Ce forum offre un format et un cadre annuel de réflexion, d'exploration des moyens d'améliorer la coopération du Maroc avec les petits États insulaires et de développer avec chacun de ces États, notamment africains, les meilleures coopérations possibles pour répondre aux besoins des citoyens et citoyennes de ces États insulaires et de promouvoir la démocratie, de promouvoir l'état de droit et de promouvoir le développement et la coopération sud-sud. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Monsieur Ambassador. I want to really, if you could develop this for me in this spare question that I have here, because look, you referenced this, but Morocco, as we know, has been extremely active in providing cooperative assistance across the African continent. But how do you see the Cotonou Agreement actually helping Africa's neighbouring small island states? We're looking at the states ranging from Cap Verde all the way through to Mauritius. It's very specific.
Nous avons des coopérations bilatérales qui touchent à plusieurs secteurs de développement, notamment en matière de formation des cadres et d'enseignement supérieur par l'octroi des bourses, des formations techniques aux cadres dans tous les domaines, notamment dans le domaine du développement de l'état de droit, de nouvelles technologies, des énergies renouvelables et de renforcement de la situation des femmes et des enfants dans des situations difficiles. Aussi, nous avons développé en urgence des coopérations pour la lutte contre le Covid-19 et malgré toutes les contraintes que rencontrent les pays que nous rencontrons aussi, nous avons tenu à soutenir ces États par l'assistance médicale, par les dons de médicaments et par l'octroi des vaccins à ces pays amis et frères.
Ambassadeur, merci pour votre réponse à ma question. Merci.
Your French is perfect.
It's very basic, but thank you for the compliment. I don't think I could sustain a conversation, but thank you. Thank you so much for that. I would now like to pass the floor back to Commissioner Reinders for a few final words. And also, I would like to hear your conclusions on what has been said so far. From my perspective, I'm hearing a great deal of optimism and hope.
No, thank you for such an opportunity. I want to say that it's really a pleasure first to see some people taking the floor, and because I have had some contacts with them before in other capacities, I said, but now it's very important to see that we are working on the same goals. If you look to the Cotonou Agreement, in fact, we try to work to develop a sustainable economy and, of course, to give a real resilience against climate change. The reason why I've insisted on the common approach that we have had in the preparation and in the conclusion of the Paris Agreement. But it's not just to develop the economy and to be resilient in relation with the climate change. It's also with a real capacity to have an inclusive and secure society. And again, I've listened to the comments about the rule of law. I've given myself some indications on this, but also gender equality and human rights. And I will say that it's very important to continue to try to develop a common approach between us on this, and then to try to have an influence in the global discussions on the same issues, because we'll have to do a lot of things to go out of the pandemic, and I don't want to go back to our decision to provide vaccines to many different partners, and because I'm sure that it's through the vaccination that we will go out of the pandemic. But then we need to work on the recovery, and we need to work on the development of a sustainable economy. And to be concrete, at the urban level, we had, before the pandemic, two main objectives. It was two transitions, in fact, the digital transition and the transition to a more sustainable economy, so the so-called Green Deal. In all relations, we need to do the same. And I was very pleased to listen the different comments about such a commitment to go to a real recovery plan in different partners countries with the same goals, to invest in modern technologies like the digital transformation, but also to work more and more about a sustainable economy. And to do that, to conclude, we need, of course, to take initiatives at the level of the authorities, the different governments, the different international organizations. But we need also to take on board all the businesses, and it's the reason why at the EU level we are working on a sustainable governance initiative. We want to have a real sustainable governance in the companies, and we need to take on board the consumers, because of course we need to give a better information to the consumers to be able to make better choices to more sustainable products, more sustainable goods and services. And so again, if we are working together on this, it will be very important to take the floor in many multilateral organizations and to try to give an orientation to all the debates. And I was very pleased to take part in such a panel this morning, because again, it's a real proof that we are 27 at the EU level, but you are more in the seats in number. And when we are together in different international discussions, we have a real capacity to have an influence. And that's very important, not just to think that we are all the time discussing just with China and the US. It's not true. We are discussing, of course, with the US, we are discussing with China, but we want also to be able to organize some alliances with the different partners. And it's the reason why I was very pleased to see the development with the new Cotonou agreement, because it's a good base to have such a kind of alliance.
Absolutely. I mean, it is fascinating from the perspective of an outsider looking in at this new geopolitics which is happening here, heralded by this agreement. And please stay with me, Ambassador Reinders, because look, again, from your perspective, how does the revised Cotonou agreement really strengthen these bilateral relations between the EU and the individual ACP countries and, of course, SIDS, because the relationship has been taken to a new level, a level which is profound going forward?
No, but it's true that the goal is to develop not only a relation between two organizations, if I may, or maybe more than that, because you know that with the Cotonou Agreement, we are in discussion with our African partners and Caribbean and the SIDS. But I'm sure that when we are discussing at the bilateral level, it will be very important to go more in detail about the specificities of the different partners. And I've said that in my introductory remarks. It's very important to take on board the very specific situations that we have seen in different partner countries. And the bilateral discussions will be very important to do that. Of course, I'm quite interested to see in the near future if it will be possible again to go back to the region, because you know that for the moment, unfortunately, not only in the EU, but with many partners, we are in discussion with video and no more with a physical presence. And that makes a difference to have sometimes a real physical presence in a meeting, but more than that, that makes a difference in the bilateral relations to be present on the ground. Of course, we are very pleased to receive many people from the SIDS to Brussels, but it will be also very important to organize different visits on the ground in the different islands. And again, in the new development of the Cotonou Agreement, it was a real part of the discussion to take more into account the specificities, not only of the different regions, but of the different individual partners. And that is very important. And it's the reason why when we try to give some example, I've tried to do that, about the solidarity with the vaccines, or about the support for the justice system, or the support for some kind of development into a sustainable economy, we try to take into account what are the specific needs of each and every one partner. There are common rules, of course, there are common principles, but it's very important to dedicate the different kind of actions to the specificities of the different partners. And I know that the resilience against the climate change, it's very different, of course, from one country to another one. And we are knowing that it's very important to invest in a good way, take into account the specific situation that we have seen on the ground. So again, we will continue to work on it, and I'm sure that in the near future we'll develop, after the pandemic, in the way out of the pandemic, more and more bilateral contacts with the different partners in the Cotonou Agreement.
Of course, part of this roadmap building that we're seeing going forward. So for those of you who are watching us online, you can see how the screen has broadened. We now have our panelists here again, and a new face, in fact, Christelle Pratt. She's the Assistant Secretary General of the OACP. It's good to see you. I'd like to put this question to you because, look, the word specifics has been mentioned a great deal in this meeting, but what do you regard as the main achievements to arise from this agreement in terms of how it benefits SIDS and their citizens?
Present here this morning. I think that the Secretary General, our Secretary General Chakotay, in his opening statement actually attested to the fact that throughout the negotiations, the OACPS political hierarchy really engaged and advocated for the responsibility of all the parties to acknowledge the unique characteristics and the issues of OACPS SIDS throughout the Foundation Agreement and the regional protocols. And so if one actually analyses the Foundation Agreement and the protocols, you would find many articles that are supportive of SIDS, whether they are least developed countries or middle income countries. And so in the interest of time, I'll just highlight a few special references to SIDS, which can be found in Title V, Environmental Sustainability and Climate Change. Those are Articles 54.3 and 54.4. And more specifically on ocean, seas and marine resources, climate action, Article 58.1, climate change and security, and then disaster risk reduction and management, Article 60.1 through to 60.5. But I think that importantly, in the case of the Caribbean and Pacific regional protocols, one could say that they are SIDS, SIDS-centric and SIDS-specific, as all OACPS member states from these two regions are in fact SIDS. And they make up 31 of our 38 small island developing states of the 79 member strong OACPS. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to put this question now to the whole panel. So please, whoever wants to answer, please join in. I don't really want to be in the position where I have to nominate someone to answer the question. But look, there is this sense of collectivity, strength in numbers. We know that the EU, the OACPS members, they represent over 1.5 billion people and over half the UN membership. Given that, how will the reality of those numbers influence the post-COVID narrative to the benefit of those citizens? Because what we're all agreed on is that we've reached a turning point now, that perhaps too many people have been excluded from conversations, but that can no longer continue as a status quo. Who would like to tackle that, the reality of those numbers influencing the post-COVID-19 narrative?
I'd be very happy to start because the Commonwealth is 1/3 of the world. We've got 2.4 billion people, and we are encompassing 5 regions. And I think one of the things that has really come to the fore is we need a new infrastructure to respond to the reality of this very complex intersection that we now have between climate, between economy, and between health. And this has never been stronger. So I think this is why you've heard so much discussion about the need for a multi-dimensional vulnerability index. If we look at climate, when a country is devastated by a climate incident, it doesn't care whether you're middle income, high income, low income. You can go from a high income country to a no income country like that. So I think we do have to have a new construct, and this is why the Commonwealth has been working with all our partners as hard as we can to deliver this new multi-dimensional vulnerability index, which looks at the exogenous shocks to which we're all subject. The days when we're just going to look at whether we are fiscally prudent have gone. This fiscal prudence is there, but it doesn't help you with everything else. So I think one of the major things we have to do, and we have to come as a global community together on, is to look at the multidimensional nature of the resilience that we need and the vulnerability. So I think it's a huge issue for us, but coming together for implementation. We've done so much about talking. So if you look at what we're doing hands with this is where we go.
Would anyone else like to add to that at all?
Maybe just one word, if I may, to say that we try, of course, to work to develop the multilateral approach. Sometimes it's very difficult. I want to insist on the fact that we have had many discussions, activities, and many works in the last months at the EU level to manage the Brexit. It was a pity, of course, to see one of our member states going out of the European Union. And now we try to re-engage in a common approach with our colleagues from UK, but it's not easy, of course, and it was maybe a difficult moment, not only for the EU, but for also the evolution at the multilateral level, because we have had many activities, again, to organize and to manage it. But when we try now to have an influence in the UN or in other kind of international organizations, we need to define some priorities. When we discuss, to be concrete, about climate change, about environmental issues, maybe with the SIDS, it's important to discuss about the blue economy, to discuss about the marine biodiversity, and to say it's possible for the EU and for the partners in the SIDS to have common approach. And we have tried to do that in the last years already, to define real priorities, because today in the panel it was very pleased to see that we have discussed about a lot of things, of course, and a global approach on all the different issues. And of course we are working together on the rule of law, on different kind of element of governance in the fight for gender equality, and I don't want to repeat what was said, but we need also to say what are our priorities for the next years in a common approach in some organization. It's a sort of strategy, in fact. And again, the blue economy and the marine biodiversity are maybe two very important issues to build a new world with a sustainable economy in the future. And so I will be very pleased to see how it's possible to engage on this with the partners in the SIDS. And because, again, with the number of partners, it's possible to have a real influence in the UN, and not only in the UN, maybe in other international organizations.
Okay, that's fantastic. And would anyone else like to address those points raised in that answer before I move on to another question which has come to us?
If I may, Juliet,
please do.
Just really seized by the comments by the Commissioner and Secretary General Scotland. And I think in 2021, we have a number of really important multilateral meetings. We have the COP26, COP15 for a post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and then the United Nations Food System Summit. I just mention these because I feel that one of the central principles of the new agreement between the OACPS and the EU is about multilateral engagement with our international partners. And so we definitely do look forward to working closely with international partners in these important settings. And I think noting these numbers, of course, 38 small island developing states of the OACPS, 79 OACPS member states, partnering with 27 EU partners, and then of course the wider membership of the Commonwealth. And I think that we've really got to start to think about how we engage from a very early stage on some of these important initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put to the panel a question which has come to us from the International Trade Centre. So thank you so much for that from the ITC. How does the panel see the role of micro and small businesses being more involved in these issues, given that they make up 99% of SIDS businesses? So that's from the International Trade Centre. Who would like to tackle that question first? And again, please, if anybody else wishes to add to something, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to be first again, but
it takes a woman to get things going.
Because, as you know, for the majority of our member states, their businesses are small and medium-sized businesses. So we've launched a whole network for SMEs and a new connectivity agenda. And we have to understand that if we don't support micro, small and medium-sized businesses, we're not really supporting SIDS. So if you look at the 32 small states that we have, they are dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises. So I think it's a really wonderful opportunity for us to work on this issue, not just with the EU and the OACP and the UN, but we have to do it in a way that's very practical. And I would certainly invite people to look at what we've done with the connectivity agenda, because we are putting very practical tools into the hands of our member states. And we're looking, for instance, if we can create an app, because most of our countries are governed by a similar law. And as a result, we can accelerate by sharing best practice, but also sharing with our member states what doesn't work and what we need to do to support it. So I'd be very keen to work with the EU and others on this, because as was just said by the Commissioner, we have to focus on practical, implementable things. And the blue economy is a huge issue. Good for women, because there's a lot of women involved in that blue economy, and we can do practical things to make it better.
Okay, Didier, would you like to respond to that?
But maybe just to say two elements. First of all, also in the EU, you know that the majority of the companies are in fact very small companies, and we are working with them. And so the first priority that we have is to take into account the specificity of the very small companies when we are discussing on different regulation. I will come, I said, with a new initiative about the sustainable corporate governance. But of course, it's impossible to ask the same requirement, to put the same requirements on the shoulders of very small companies and on the shoulder of very large companies. But we need to go in the same direction. So it's very important to provide some technical assistance, to provide some funding, to be able in very small companies to do the same, or to go in the same direction about the sustainable economy, and to have an analysis about the possible negative impact of their operations or the possible risks for the environment, climate change or biodiversity, but also the different risks about human rights or about social situation. But that's the first element. The second element, of course, is how it's possible to finance the development of very small companies. And you know, in some years ago, it was the very good trend to organize microfinancing of very small companies. For now, we have some experience in this. And so it's very useful maybe to exchange the best practices in the way that we have managed the microfinancing in the last years, because it was with some success, it was also with some mistakes. We need to explain that, but we need to continue. So first, to organize the regulations with a specific attention to the very small companies and not only to the SMEs in general, and then to see how it's possible to develop the best solutions for microfinancing, taking into account the lessons learned in the past. Je voudrais simplement dire, parce que nous en avons parlé souvent dans des contacts précédents au Maroc, je vois monsieur l'ambassadeur présent, je voudrais dire que c'est une expérience que on pourrait d'ailleurs, au départ des échanges qui ont été faits entre l'Union européenne et des pays d'Afrique, et notamment avec le Maroc, partager avec d'autres. Parce qu'il y a eu beaucoup d'efforts en matière de financement à l'échelon des toutes petites entreprises, et au Maroc comme ailleurs d'ailleurs, avec des succès réels dans le développement d'activités, avec aussi parfois des dérives. Et donc il faut pouvoir échanger pour bien situer les meilleures pratiques que l'on a mises en avant.
Okay, thank you very much. And would anybody else like to add to this before I take another question? We have a few more minutes left. No? Okay. This is a question, in fact, for Christelle Pratt, of the Assistant Secretary General of the OACP. Does the post-Cotonou agreement address obstacles on mid-income SIDS trying to access official development funding? And how will the criteria and fund deployment evolve?
Thank you. I think in answering this question, it may be prudent to highlight a particular article, that is Article 82.1 on international development cooperation, which states that the EU is committed to sustainable development and the allocation of financial resources to combat environmental degradation and climate change. And then I'd like to quote directly from the Foundation Agreement, and I'll quote, "Due attention will be paid to the specific challenges of middle-income countries, including their inequality, exclusion, and access to resources," unquote. And so how this manifests for OACPS SIDS with middle-income country status will really be determined by the OACPS and the EU as we discuss and elaborate implementation modalities and arrangements. And so I think that's the short answer to that. But I also think that it really depends on our combined efforts with key partners such as the Commonwealth Secretariat and others to develop a universal or a multidimensional vulnerability index. And this has been said time and again by Secretary-General Scotland and my own Secretary-General Chakotay in this meeting, because it is important for all of us. And it is important as we reiterate and reinforce the common but differentiated responsibilities of our global partners, including the European Union. And I think most importantly, it is really about how we meet our objectives for our peoples in terms of our sustainable development objectives and to build resilience to this climate crisis, as well as, other risks that challenge us day in and day out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Time is running against us, but I'm going to break the rules slightly and put in one more question. Baroness Scotland, I'm going to put it to you, but I'm also going to leave the way open for other people to respond, because what has emerged is that SIDS do require special case funding because of their size. They have small populations, limited resources. They are environmentally vulnerable. They face more natural hazards perhaps than other countries, and also as well, they are remote from the international market. So given all of those factors, how does the post-Cotonou agreement actually address these specifics within the framework of this revised deal?
Well, I think this is a genuine opportunity and an attempt to come together in committee to say we have to start a new structure. And I think all of us are applauding that, celebrating it. It took a long time to negotiate, and we praise God for it. However, it will be meaningless unless we give it teeth and we create an implementable structure which says, and this is the difference it is going to make. And I think that's what's been so important by this discussion, because we've all been talking about what practical things can we do together to pool the information, the expertise, so that we can put it into the hands of those who need it. And that's why we have to think about the tools we have to create. And you'll hear us banging the drum on this multi-dimensional, multifaceted vulnerability index. And this is not something that's just come today. I have had this sounding in my head for about the last 30 years, where small states have been saying, see us, look at us, understand the reality of our lives, and understand that we are subject to these things which are not of our making. If you look at the pandemic, it was not of the making of the small states. If you look at climate change, it was not of the making of the small states. If you look at the economic devastation that has come as a result of the intersection between those two, you cannot say it was the fault of the small states. They failed to do that which they should properly have done to make a difference. And knowing that, then we have as a global community to say, what are we going to do about it? 32 of us, our member states, are small. And many of them face an existential threat, not just an ordinary threat, but a threat which says, I will not be here tomorrow. So I think for us, it is no more about talking, and I celebrate and I praise and I thank everyone who's made the Cotonou agreement possible, because, you know, we were just holding on thinking, please let this happen. So we can celebrate that. But now it's down to us. Now we have to put flesh on the bone. We have to look at the strategic plans. We've got to look at the implementation possibilities. And the great thing is we do have that possibility. We have an opportunity to create a truly sustainable market, to reset this whole situation. But we haven't just to will it, we have to actually do it. And therefore, if you look at everything that the Commonwealth Secretariat are doing, is we're creating the toolkits, the implementation strategies, and we're reaching out to all our partners to say, please help us. Let's not concentrate on the things we disagree on. Let's concentrate on the things that we agree on. A bit like our humanity, 99% of our DNA is in common, but we tend to concentrate on that 0.1%, which makes us different and fascinating. But let's value that 0.1%, but let's join together on the 99.9%, which makes us human. And I think we have to be really frank. Cotonou is in part about fighting for the survival of humanity. And I wish it wasn't as dramatic as that, but it is. So I think we've never had a more important time. I'm thanking everybody who made this possible. I think you are heroes and heroines. Now let's deliver.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to add any further comment, or is this where we now close this meeting? Further comment? I don't think so, because I think, in fact, Baroness Scotland, you spoke for all of us. I beg your pardon. I do beg your pardon. Please.
Yes, if you allow me a few minutes to say.
Please do. Please do. I do apologize for that. I'm so sorry.
Je voudrais tout simplement dire que cette crise de Covid va donner naissance à un nouveau monde, à une nouvelle réalité. La gestion internationale de Covid a montré une chose, c'est que le système multilatéral n'a pas été très performant. Nous avons beaucoup de difficultés à gérer cette crise et nous avons vu malheureusement des comportements de beaucoup d'acteurs internationaux qui manquent d'humanisme, qui manquent de solidarité. C'est très émouvant de vous entendre, honorable Patricia Scotland, dans ces derniers mots. Et je crois qu'il est important que l'Union européenne, que le commissaire Didier Reynders, très attaché aux valeurs de droit, de solidarité, de multilatéralisme, d'explorer une nouvelle forme du multilatéralisme en faisant participer la société civile, le monde économique, les jeunes, les femmes. Il faut qu'on construise un monde plus solidaire, un monde plus responsable. Et dans le modeste effort que fournit le Maroc, jouer un rôle solidaire avec ses frères, quand il y a la volonté politique, nous pouvons faire énormément de choses. J'ai eu l'honneur de suivre ce que mon pays a fait avec beaucoup d'États insulaires, avec peu de moyens. Il y a un message à envoyer. C'est cette solidarité internationale qu'on doit construire pour vivre dans le monde plus humain, plus solidaire.
Bravo, mon frère. C'est vraiment, il y a les possibilités.
Merci.
Merci.
Thank you so much, Excellency. And thank you, in fact, to all of our panel. I said it was going to be a thought-provoking, stimulating, lively discussion, and it has been that. It's a chance for all of us to get together to make the words meaningful. As I stated in my introduction, COVID-19 has created tragedy, but out of that tragedy, there is an opportunity to work together to construct a roadmap from which all of us will benefit, with humanity speaking in one voice. Thank you so much for your time, those who have been part of this really fascinating panel, and all of you who joined us online. We appreciate your presence. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe, and I hope to see you all sometime in the not too distant future. Take care. Merci. Au revoir.
Au revoir. Au revoir. Have a good day.
Merci à tous.
Merci beaucoup, tout le monde.
Overture Solutions, leader in secure document printing and a privileged partner in digital transformation, was proud to bring its official